What's up, guys, and welcome back to the Walkout Podcast.
where we talk about fights, news, and more.
Today, we're doing something a little bit different that we mentioned in our last episode. We're doing our own awards for the UFC in 2025, and we have a bunch of different categories. Of course, the usual ones, but a few personal ones as well that we thought would be fitting and a bit special, so to speak. But let's get straight into it. The first one we have is a comeback of the year. And this one wasn't too easy, to be honest. There was a few good contenders for the award. Um, my first thought was Alexander Volkanovski, just because of the comeback he has had in his career. But when we discussed it, we did eventually come to the conclusion that he didn't really have a comeback this year. He only had one fight, and the defeats were in previous years. Um, Another comeback, I guess, is Piotr Jan. But again, he's had a really good year and no big letdowns. He's only had a winning streak. Um, so, do you want to go ahead and reveal who actually claims this one, the Comeback of the Year award?
Yeah, sure. So we've had one fighter this year who we think has really had a big comeback, who not only first had, or at least tried to defend the belt and lost it, but then fought to reclaim it less than a year later and did so. And that was Alex Pereira, who first lost the belt at UFC 313 by a 5-round decision against Magomed Ankalaev. And then he came back quite spectacularly, barely a year later, not even a year later actually, probably like 10 months later. Um, and he won by a first round knockout versus the same guy, Magomed Ankalaev, who stole his belt. And this was a really big upset, or not really a big upset, but it was a really big surprise, at least in the way that he achieved this win. A
The
lot
way he won, right?
of people
That's a
were
special
predicting
thing.
him. Yeah,
That
exactly. Like a lot of people maybe thought that he could win the second fight, the rematch, but still, I don't think that many people predicted a first round knockout quite in the way, in the fashion he achieved it as well. Almost not letting Ankalaev land a single strike on him, almost, and outlanding him by several times the one in the brief fight that they had. So I do really think that this one qualifies, and I think that Pereira, if anything, this year he had a big, big comeback. Uh, yes.
definitely. I mean, the definition of an insane comeback. And just to add on to what you said there, a lot of people had described Ankalaev as his kryptonite. Like, when he gets through everyone else, the guy who will eventually stop him will be the wrestler, the Russian wrestler in Ankalaev. And of course, that seemed to be correct in the first fight. But then Pereira did in the second one what I and many people thought he would have done in the first one. He just showed the difference and showed how significant that power really is even against a really really big guy like Ankalaev might as well be a heavyweight in Pereira. The first touch, you could
Yeah,
just see the
exactly.
look in his eyes, in Ankalaev's eyes, and then you knew that it was over. Right, it was a matter of seconds. So
Yeah,
definitely,
exactly. That's the big thing here, that he turned up in the first fight. I mean, Pereira did. He turned up in the first fight, and he had a really mediocre performance in terms of his own standards. And then, we had some news come out after that about him being injured, and some people believed it, some people didn't. You believed it, and you betted on him basically winning the second fight and coming and taking the belt back, and he did so. And I think that probably did prove the fact that he did have an injury. At least something did affect him in the first fight, because the same Pereira that fought the first fight did not fight the second fight. I mean, it's like you said, the power. I mean, there was such a big power difference. And Kalev, he just had fear in his eyes the entire, or I mean, during the entirety of the brief second fight. So completely different Pereira that showed up on that night. Incredible performance.
exactly. All right, so that's the first one. Moving on we have our next category, which is the nominees for Breakout Star of the Year. So a bit of a different one here. Obviously, someone who hasn't been established before, but now, as we close the year out, everyone will have heard of them. And again, just to give a few honorable mentions here, I think that this hasn't got to be a young fighter, is what I meant to say. And someone I've instantly thought of was just a quick shout out to Michael Morales, because I'm gonna be honest, I didn't know that much about him at the start of the year, and when he put Sean Brady out cold, I really didn't expect it, and it was probably one of the most shocked I've been in in a fight this year. So that credit just goes to him, and I think that he's gonna go on and achieve a lot of really brilliant things in the welterweight division, and is also, by the way, a huge welterweight. How that guy's make that 170, I don't want to know. I think
Yeah,
the amount of weight cut that he
like
has to go through.
it's
Um,
incredible.
Yes, exactly. And a quick other one, of course, Leron Murphy, a guy who we, of course, knew of, but he doesn't talk that much before the fights and hadn't fought that many really big names. But at the end of the year, a lot of people, including Volkanovski himself, were calling for Leron Murphy to get the title fight because, of course, he was an underdog going into the fight against Alan Pico, and then went on to have a spectacular finish. But enough about the nearly guys. Who is the official Breakout Star of the Year?
Yeah, so coming in as the breakout star of the year, according to us, is none other than Joshua Van, the current, albeit a bit controversially, the current flyweight champion of the world. And starting this year, I don't think that a lot of people knew about him or even knew his name, where he came from. But by the end of this year, I think that basically everyone that follows the UFC at least watches, who at least watches the pay per views, has an idea who Joshua Van is, and that is someone who turns up every fight and gives it all, and really fights with his heart on his sleeve, you could say almost, and puts up some incredible has put up some incredible performances this year, and chief among them being when he fought against Roy Val, and he both of them broke basically the record for amount of significant strikes in a 3-round fight, which was incredible, and we'll return to that later more specifically. But in terms of Joshua Van, I mean, as I said, he showed up this year, wasn't that well known, and then he fought four times this year, and as a newcomer at the age that he is as well, I think that he really does qualify for this award, the prospect of the year. So that is our pick. Do you have anything more to add on Joshua Van, or are we going to move on to the next category?
Really, to be honest, I think you covered everything except for the Royval fight, and as you correctly said, we'll get on to that. Of course, we will. So please carry on to the next category.
Yes. So the next category of our UFC 2025 awards is the upset of the year. And do you want to take this one, maybe, or should I continue?
No, please continue. I'm interested to know what you have to say about this one because there are a few, right?
Yeah, I mean there are a few upsets this year, and I mean there are some uh, maybe more well known and some lesser known. And it was quite a struggle picking this category, right? Because you don't want to take something that most people haven't seen. You don't want to pick a fight that most people haven't seen. So, for example, we looked at Ewing versus Wellmaker, and Wellmaker was a heavy favorite before that fight. But that fight, it wasn't. It was still on a prelim, not that well known. I think, of course, people watching this, listening to this podcast might know it, but if you don't, I wouldn't blame you. Even though Wellmaker has been a prospect for some time this year, it's still we still want to basically keep to the main events uh, for this award show. And And regarding that, we had one particular fight here who we thought qualified, and that was Team Elliott versus Kaya Sakura, where Team Elliott as a moderate underdog, and Asakura as quite a heavy favorite at least, lost versus Team Elliott, and Team Elliott did so in quite a spectacular fashion, and that's really what we looked at here. Also, the method of the win. A lot of people didn't predict Team Elliott here to win, and he, you could say at least when I watched it live, I thought he dominated Kaya Sakura, and most people seem to have shared that since. A lot of people have almost called it some sort of, even though Asakura lost his first fight in the UFC, of course, versus Pantoja,
Yeah.
but that was an extreme step up. A lot of people have almost called this like a, like a second almost broad check or something like that, considering that Tim Elliott is, quite a step down from Pantoja, right?
I mean, Tim Elliott,
Their
all the credit to
competition.
him. Amazing
Yeah,
win. But we can't forget that he's 39 years old for a flyweight. I mean, that's unheard of. And Kaya Sakura, also for the record, of course, the previous rising fighting champion, bantamweight champion, I believe he was there, but then came over, cut a bit more weight. And like you said, of course, he lost to Pantoja, but basically everyone does.
yeah,
So when you have this second chance to get a highlight reel knockout or finish, like the UFC probably wanted to capture that part of the world and that audience as well, and bring a bit more hype in, I was extremely shocked. And by the way, like you mentioned, the fact that it was done in such a way as well. In other sports, you can talk about it looked like the teams have swapped shirts, and that really like if you would have told me when watching this fight that yeah, the guy who's winning is the is the former champ of another organization, the guy who's beating is 39, I would have said like yeah, that makes sense. But the fact that
yeah,
it was the other way
yeah,
around, it's really strange. Like I said, maybe this is a bit of a niche pick because there are a few other ones that you could go for. Of course, there are, but I totally agree with you that this is the one that stood out the most to me. And I don't have anything else to add. Just quickly, what I do have to say about the upsets. I mean, the Riddler defeating Bo Nickel was one of the ones that really shocked me because there was so much hype from the whole of American top team and whole of America basically behind Bo Nickel. And he said that I remember him talking his stuff and saying that yeah, me and Hamzat should have a fight and it wouldn't be hard and all this and that. And then he went on to lose. And that's just like your point earlier. It's about the way you lose. And Bo Nickel quit against René Ritter. And don't get us wrong, René Ritter is a really solid fighter. He's really good. We saw that, of course, when he beat Robert Whittaker. But Bo Nickel, he wasn't hurt enough, personally, in my opinion. But not only in my opinion, but in the words of Michael Bisping, I believe that Daniel Cormier, a lot of other people came out after the fight and said he basically quit. He didn't get hurt enough to. No one called off the fight. It was Bonico who just didn't want to continue. And in that way, to lose when you are quite a heavy favorite, I think it sticks out as well. But enough about that, because as you said, the winner is of course going to be Tim Elliott from us here. If I can continue, if you don't have anything else on that, um, I believe that our
nope,
next
go on.
category is event of the year, right? And this is quite a big one. And I'm gonna hand it over to you. But what I do want to say is that the fact that Tim Elliott versus Kei Asakura started off a phenomenal card. Of course, it was UFC 319, where this upset started off and really got us going. Um, then Michael Page and Cannonier, sorry, had a really good scrap, followed by Carlos Prates' amazing finish against Neil, and then, of course, Lauren Murphy spinning elbow, it was right, against Aaron Pico. But
Yeah,
when we do decide and grade the event, so to speak, we have to look at the whole card, of course, but also the main dish, the main event. And
Yeah,
Dricus du
maybe the
Plessis
main event.
versus Hamza Chimaev is nothing worthy at all to be spoken about um, as a card of the year, basically. So UFC 319, honorable mention. I know that you've mentioned previously that UFC 320 as well, right? Was a really good card. Do you think that that is event of the year, or do you have anything else in mind?
No, I mean, I think that UFC 320 is an honorable mention here. It's a strong candidate, but I don't think that the entire card holds up when compared to our winner, and that is, of course, UFC 317, where you had the main event with Ilia Topuria knocking out Charles Oliveira in a quite stunning knockout in a stunning fashion, and became a two-time division champ. Obviously, a big thing in the UFC, almost biggest thing maybe you can reach now before we get a three-time division champion, if that ever happens. So
Yeah,
obviously, just that is the crowning moment maybe of that card. But before that, you had a good fight between Pantoja and Kai Kara France, where Pantoja submitted Kai Kara France. We had a finish there as well in the co-main, and also before that, and sort of being linked to the co-main, was the fight between that we spoke about earlier between Van and Royval, where we had an amazing fight, and that fight basically set up Joshua Van as the next contender to Pantoja after he won versus Kakara France. So I think what really makes that card so good is just the storyline between those two, and just the Royval versus Van fight being so incredible, and then also you had a co-main, and which was also good, and of course the main event, which you know an incredible knockout and an incredible moment in the UFC, you could call it at least. Regardless if you support Charles Oliveira or if you support Ilia Topuria, I think that everyone can agree on that it was a really big moment in the UFC. And then you also had, if you don't want to add anything more to the card, I would also like to speak about, Benil Dariush versus Moicano before that, maybe not
please
being
don't.
the best fight. Yeah, no, please don't. Yeah, exactly. But maybe not being the best fight, but still, you know, at least you had two guys who, at that point, both of them, Moicano had just fought Islam Makhachev, and you know, so you at least have that. That's not okay. It wasn't the best. I can't really defend it because it wasn't a good fight.
I
But
can
what I want
kind
to,
of save you here, sorry to interrupt, but
yeah,
the fact
yeah,
when watching this live, I don't know if you remember the feeling, but seeing that, which was one of the slowest, highly ranked fights I've ever seen, to then see Brandon Royval versus Joshua Van.
yeah,
At first,
yeah,
I thought that my standards had just lowered so much that I appreciated that fight just because the previous one was so slow. But then, as you went on to say, and I think as we leave UFC 317 as the greatest card of the year here, do you just want to go ahead and actually take it away for fight of the year, right? Because I'm not even going to give you an honorable mention. There is only one correct answer.
yeah. Of course, and I think that that is Royval, Brandon Royval versus Joshua Van, where Joshua Van picked up a decision win after 3 rounds of incredibly intense fighting, and I think that the only way we have to, if I'm going to give this any sort of reason or argument for being the fight of the year, is the fact that Brandon Royval, within 3 rounds, landed 215 significant strikes, while Joshua Van landed 204 significant strikes. So that is more than 400 significant strikes within 3 rounds of fighting.
Yeah.
This was definitely the most intense fight I think I've seen in a long while. And the only thing that maybe this fight missed is sort of incredible maybe knockout power of an Topuria or of a real heavyweight, but then we wouldn't have had those 3 rounds of incredible fighting back and forth, then someone would probably have ended up on the floor. And even though there was a big moment by the end when the momentum shifted towards Joshua Van, and he did uh, he did get a knockdown on Royval, and it was almost over, but I think that Royval was saved by the bell, basically you could say, by the ender, and so I think that also made it a really good fight. Actually, the fact that it wasn't a knockout, but just you just had those two guys. Of course, a late knockout would probably have made it even better. Just like at UFC 300 when you had Justin Gaethje. You remember that?
Yeah, Holloway. Yeah.
Holloway, that was insane.
But
So, but still,
Marcus,
of course,
that
every
moment
fight.
was like really good hype with the Gaethje Holloway, and I know a lot of people is like the most watched UFC clip of all time.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I also, as a combat sports fan, I really do appreciate that there is something beautiful in the fact that both Royval and Van finished the fight standing, and even though they were badly hurt, both of them, both guys finished, and they had that honor of actually closing out the fight. I mean,
yeah,
no one looks at
absolutely.
Royval, even though he lost, with any shame. He was part of one of the greatest fights I've ever seen, regardless of year, regardless of sport, basically.
Yeah,
And
it was so even. Also, you know,
yeah, exactly.
that's the
And
thing
it's,
that made it so good.
I think you said it there, but the fact that it broke the significant strikes record, for a lot of people get it wrong. They think that it's the record for a 3 round fight. Yeah, it was a 3 round fight, but it broke the total record, including every 5 round fight it's have been. And I get the fact that you need to reserve your gas tank, but still, that's it's amazing to think about, and that's the best credit you can give, especially the lighter guys like the flyweight, because they don't get that much hype, but the fights are incredibly entertaining. And the last thing I'll add to that is it was like one of the only UFC fights, which was very weird for me personally, where actually it was a little tough to watch at times because they took so much damage, both of them. And
Yeah,
I know that they're fighters and that's what they meant to do. But often one guy goes out or quits or something, and these two just stayed in the fire for 15 minutes straight. I mean, I wasn't completely comfortable watching it, to be honest. And that just says something about the fight, right?
yeah. I mean, so incredible just the way that they just traded blows for you know for the entire round. It's like you said, they never really slowed down, and that's the thing. They never tried to really conserve energy, and they were hitting each other like with all of their power, basically all of the time. Like they weren't conserving power or energy in the fight at all, and that yeah, I kind of agree with you there that it made almost a little bit like someone here is gonna eventually just fall over because they're gonna take too much brain damage from all of the strikes to the head. But fortunately, that didn't happen, and we had a really good, fight all through the 3 rounds. And yeah, I don't think there's much more to say about that fight. Just go and watch it again. I think it's up, might be up on YouTube. If it's not, you're gonna have to get Paramount Plus or something like that
Yeah.
to get
And I
access
just
to
buy
this
the
fight.
single
But
fight, yeah.
yeah, exactly. But it's almost worth it, to find it. Just find it some way if you haven't seen this fight, because it's definitely a fight of the year. And yeah, that's all we have to say about that category. So moving on, we have knockout of the year. Do you want to take this one, maybe?
Sure. For me, this is the big one because as much as I want to try and act there as I care about respecting both guys finishing on
Yeah,
the feet, what we love to see is a phenomenal knockout. And in contrast to Fight of the Year, where there was basically only one that stood out as the very best one, we have a few. This one, I think, might be the toughest one we had when discussing this, because there are a few really spectacular ones. And of course, we have nailed it down here and are only going to mention the few that we thought were the best. One of them being probably my personal favorite, Ruffy having a spinning wheel kick against Bobby Green, or King Green, sorry, I don't know why he's called that, but anyways, but the problem with
it's
that,
a
we've
very
all seen it,
difficult name,
it
actually.
is one of the greatest knockouts I've ever seen, ever, not only this year. But the problem is that it was against Bobby Green, who is old, has taken a lot of damage. I'm really sorry for the disrespect, but he's not the smartest fighter. He it's a pretty good opponent if you want to have a highlight reel knockout. And could Ruffy do that against some of the more higher ranked guys? I'm not too sure. Maybe he could, but then if he does that, we'll have the conversation, right? Otherwise, I think a moment that we really cherished when watching was Leroy Murphy knocking out Aaron Pico because, as I said previously, he was an underdog going into that fight, and neither of us really got that because Leroy Murphy is really tried and tested and one of the best guys in the division, and Aaron Pico hadn't had a UFC fight before. I know he was very well respected, especially as a wrestler, in the US before the fight. But as we know, this isn't wrestling, it's MMA. And when you go in with someone like Murphy, you're really gonna pay the price for that. And that spinning elbow was something that I didn't really expect because Murphy, I'm not gonna be like disrespectful, but in my opinion, for a striker of his pedigree, his fights before this one wasn't the most entertaining, and maybe that's why we look at this one with a lot of, I don't know what to say, but I'm very impressed. I guess is what I'm trying to guess to with this Murphy knockout. But neither of these two spectacular knockouts are going to win our prize. Do you want to go ahead and reveal what actually is?
Yeah. So, I mean, of course, there were some really great knockouts that you just covered there, but there can only be one winner of this award, and that is for us on the Walkout Podcast is Ilia Topuria knocking out Charles Oliveira on UFC 317 to become a two-time champion to win the belt of the UFC lightweight division. And I mean, man, this was. I think that this knockout is just so insane in the way that it crowned off such a good. Like we already talked about the card of UFC 317, but
Yeah.
it crowned off all of that momentum that you had towards the end of the card. There was so much hype before that main event, and I really do think that it lived up to it in this way. Of course, if you're a Charles Oliveira super fan, it might not feel that way, but for a lot of casuals and in general for the MMA community, I think that still, it's like you said, of course, people can also respect the grappling, but a really good knockout is something that everyone enjoys in combat sports. And that's, I think, what made it so incredible. It's just, you could feel it before, all through that first round of that fight of Ilyas Borja versus Charles Oliveira. You could feel almost him waiting for the moment to unload his combination that is so dangerous with when he knocked out Max Holloway in the fight before this, and it was almost, you could say, maybe a bit similar in terms of mid combination. Of course, before that he did stun Max, and then he went after him and got him out of there. But this was different because this knockout, he basically put him out of there, or he put him to sleep with the first touch almost, right? Like mid combination.
Yeah, I mean, it was like
Scary almost.
we've said it before. I basically think we've said it in our review of that fight. We both expected it. A lot of people expected it.
Yeah.
But to go up a weight class, sorry, against one of the legends, but not a finished legend, a legend who people actually thought was one still probably definitely top three lightweights in the world, who of course has taken a lot of damage, but hasn't ever shown himself to be shinny. I mean, he just pulled him into the dead space, and for us like myself, who actually love a bit of boxing, just general boxing, that's like the difference there. Because what's flashy on a TikTok is what Murphy and Ruffy are doing. It's doing something spectacular, but you would never pull that out. No one is telling me that you pull out a spinning wheel kick against Charles Oliveira. Because if you miss it a bit and he times you, he's gonna get to your back, and that's that. But what you have to do if you want to close a guy like that out is exactly exactly his new nickname, exactly what Tuporia did there. You pull him into the dead space. He fainted a bit with his body, very slight feints, may I add, that a lot of people aren't picking up on. And I saw people like Paddy Pimblett say after the fight that he basically just blasted Charles Oliveira for his fighting style. But I think, of course, he's not the
Yeah,
most responsible fighter, but also you have to give a bit of that credit to Emporia because he's fainting when he lures you in and looks like he's going to do something else. It's what we talk about in boxing, like Mayweather used to say, you create a pattern, then you get the other guy to follow your pattern, and then you break the own pattern. And that's what he did, and it was devastating. I mean,
yeah,
it's hard to find words, even though I've gone on a lot here. But the knockout itself, he was like out cold, cold. It was,
yeah.
yeah, basically
So
all
I
UFC fans love Charles Oliveira, so to see him out like that was tough. But that's also what makes it the knockout of the year, right?
yeah, I really do think so. I think it would have been a completely different conversation if that combination only really stunned him, and then it would be up against of course it would still be an incredible knockout because it's not anyone, it's Charles Oliveira. But I think that still, if he'd only have stunned him and then maybe gotten him on the ground with and got him out with some ground and pound, that's a different thing. But I mean, him being out cold basically from the first, you know, punch of the combination almost. Then he just he kept going through the combination, and that's when he just folded over. And I mean, there's not much else to say. I think we covered it pretty well here. I think that just the magnitude of that knockout, it really is really what carries it, and just how instant it was, how accurate it was, and like you said, maybe not the flashes, it's not a spinning head kick, but it is the fundamentals done right, perfectly right. A fluid combination with incredible accuracy. That is boxing really at its core, right? When it's at its best, maybe.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. And then, lastly, the biggest category, you've probably guessed it by now, it's the Fighter of the Year. And speaking of Ilya Taporia, he's actually not getting this one because I do want to clarify here what we're defining with our criteria. And Fighter of the Year, for us at least, of 2025, it's not really who the best fighter is. It's who has done the most impressive year. That's why it's called Fighter of the Year and not pound for pound number one. Because I just want to add that Ilya Taporia, if every fighter was the same weight, I would probably pick him uh, to beat anyone in the UFC. And a lot of people would say that about Islam Makhachev, the other two times weight division champ that we have active right now, um, and Alex Pereira, the third. A lot of big names, and a lot of people think that these are fighter of the year. All, of course, having spectacular years. But I do you agree that those are probably three, except for a winner, the three biggest names that people would claim, or does anyone else come to mind?
No, I mean, I think you covered it pretty well there.
Yeah.
Of course, Islam Makhachev being and Ilya Topuria, both of them being, you know, obvious. I think, nominations here. But I mean, there's only one guy who can take it, really, right?
Exactly, and I'll let you get on to him, but just quickly, what I have to say is, so that people get it, it's that Topuria, amazing knockout, but that's one fight.
Yeah,
Islam
one
Makhachev,
fight in
i-
2025. The
yeah,
entire year, people need to remember that. Just Holloway was in
exactly,
November, past
exactly.
November.
Remember that number of fights because that's very key here. Islam Makhachev also, yeah, right now the pound for pound king, but he had a fight started here against Moicano. Not his fault that Arman Sarukian pulled out, but also not the fault of the winner here. It's the game's the game. You had a win against Moicano, who's barely ranked at the minute, and a win against Jackson Medellina, who is fairly untested, I think it's fair to say. And it wasn't
Yeah,
really
and
that
also,
entertaining of a fight. He just laid on top of him. Um, and then, of course, Alex Pereira, everyone loves him, but one win, one loss. It's not enough. It's very spectacular, but it's not enough. But of course, everyone's guessed it by now. Who is our official fighter of the year?
It's none other than the machine, Merab, one of the most active fighters of the year, and of course, doing it as starting the year as a champion and still being able to have the activity that he has had. 4 title fights in a year. I think that's a record, right? Yeah, and
Seems to be
doing it at the age as well that he is, right? 35 years old.
at that weight class as well, at bantamweight.
Yeah, and
How
at
is it
bantamweight
possible?
as well. And facing opposition like Umar Nurmagomedov to start off the year, and then Sean O'Malley, and then of course Corey Sandhagen, and then to close out the year, he had his 4th title fight of the year, just I think a month after the
Yeah,
Sandhagen fight,
it's
which is
amazing.
insane. You know, it's already insane when you think about his age and the weight class and just having a fight, but it's even more insane when you've already had 2 fights that year earlier, and also 2 fights that had I think that I mean of course the versus Umar he went 5 rounds, and versus O'Malley I think he went 3 rounds and then got a submission, and then versus Corey Sandhagen he went 5 rounds, and during all of this he basically I think might have broken the takedown record, or at least the takedown attempts record in title fights during the year. And then to close out the year, 1 month after his fight versus Sandhagen, he did fight Peter Yan in a fight that a lot of people predicted him to win beforehand. There were some discussions. We discussed, for example, his activity level throughout the year and if it would impact that fight, but we were still quite convinced that he can't lose that fight. He won so clearly last time. He's already faced Jan before, but he ended up losing that fight, and that made our decision and losing the belt also on top of that. And that made our decision, in terms of this award in this category, a bit more difficult. Beforehand, we thought that he will obviously be the fighter of the year. He still is, at least for us, but there's a conversation to be had. But it can't be any other guy because if you look at the competition, I've already said it, but I'm gonna say it one more time, and that's Umar Nurmagomedov to start off the year, probably the toughest competitor in the division at that time, and then Sean O'Malley, the second toughest guy in the division, I think, also during that time. Who I think he worked for a year, right, before that fight to really come into it. Sean O'Malley did.
It was supposed to be the best Sean O'Malley we've ever seen, and maybe it was, and that just speaks
Yeah,
level
maybe.
of how good Merab was. And sorry to take over here, but just as you said, I
No, of course.
personally I don't even think that the Umar fight, it doesn't feel like it was at the start of 2005. It seems like it was longer ago, but that's just
Yeah,
because we're used to these champions fighting some of them only once a year, at the best 2 or maybe 3 times a year, but often 2 times a year. So the Umar fight, where by the way, Merab was an underdog. How mental is that? And we both picked Merab, but the betting companies, the bookies, had Umar winning that fight, and of course he had Khabib in his corner, controlling him like with a PlayStation remote almost. But
yeah,
still, Merab outworked him, and then in the Sean O'Malley, the second fight, I'm going to be honest here. I predicted, of course, as you know, a Sean O'Malley win, and I wasn't the only one who did that. It was, like you said, Sean O'Malley hadn't had any other fights. He was just focusing on, he had fixed an old injury that he blamed for that first loss against Merab, and then he'd just been studying the tape and working every day to get to as good as he can be, and that was why I really believed that he would take Merab. And Merab finished him, and those 2 fights on their own is almost enough. Then he goes on and beats one of the greatest bantamweights of all time, even though he's not like a long reigning champ. But Sandhagen is basically like the Dustin Poirier of the bantamweight division. I mean, you shouldn't play with his name. He's incredibly skilled, and just that style as well. I know it's a bit similar to Sean O'Malley, but he's really like rangy. He's very technically good. Good is doing the disservice. I don't even find the correct word here, but it's immaculate, his technique.
Yeah,
And his fight IQ is probably the best that Merab has ever faced. And like you said in our breakdown of that fight, Merab, as you know, actually had a lot of success on the feet, which is also something that really shouldn't be slept on. And just to close out my statement here, those three fights, because what we say in boxing and in MMA, styles makes fights. It's been said from Muhammad Ali right up to now because it's a fact. We've seen so many guys who, you try and do this math where like this guy beats this guy, so surely that guy should beat this guy. No, because that's not how fighting works. Styles set each fight up so that you can't really tell how it will go, except for when Merab fights, because he almost always wins, no matter the style. So, the fact that he fought Umar and won as an underdog, submitted Sean O'Malley, then beat Sandhagen in a quite easy, not easy, that's disrespectful, but in fashion that no one
yeah.
who watched it thought Sandhagen won.
Yeah,
And
it
to
wasn't controversial at all. It was very,
no,
I think, very clear to everyone who
it
watched
was
it
a
that
clear decision. Thank you, that's exactly what I was getting at. And then to call up Dana White the next day and say, "Hey, bro, put me on for another event this year. I want to break the record for title defenses." To, in some way, try and discredit Merab because he lost that fight to Peter Yan. I mean, what more do you want from him? It have been better if he had just said after the Sandhagen fight, "No, I'm not fighting again." No, he took the fight like a fighter. You win some, you lose some, but there's no doubt in my mind that he should be fighter of the year. I mean, the fact that he took the fight is almost just gives him credit because Jan had been rebuilding himself, and Jan is definitely one of the greatest bantamweights we've ever seen. So no shame in losing to him whatsoever. And now it actually makes a case for a trilogy that could cement Merab as one of the he might be the goat of MMA if he beats Peter Yan. It might be a stretch, but it's definitely at that table with John Jones, with Demetrius Johnson, and that just says it all, right?
yeah, I mean, of course.
It's basically everything I have to say. I feel like I went on a bit of a rant here, but I'm a bit tired.
No,
I'm
I
going
mean,
to be honest.
really good
I know that you're as well
perspective.
with the disrespect that some people show to me, Rob. Um, and then to claim that someone like Islam Makhachev should be getting fighter of the year just because he bulked up a bit to welterweight and laid on top of JDM for 5 rounds. I mean, get off it.
Yeah.
That's not how we work around here.
No, of course. I mean, we have to look at the activity here, and you know, even though, of course, as we all know, Merab did lose his last fight of 2025. The fact that he had 3 fights before that, I mean, the way I'm thinking about this is you could scrap that third fight, you could scrap the fight versus Petr Yan and just have the 3 previous fights to judge this on. And I definitely think that is fighter of the year just based on those 3 fights. So that's my argument. And even then, I think that you could say that, you know, just as you covered, just taking that fight, calling Dana White the day after and saying after Corey Sandhagen and saying, I want a fourth one. I want to break the record for most title fights, title defenses. I think is it title fights? I think it's most title fights in a year. That is the record.
Both.
Yeah, it might be defenses and fights probably is the same there, but he broke that record at least, and that's just incredible. He dared to be great in terms of how we handle that, and yeah, he did lose. He did lose, but we don't know. Maybe that was just because of the incredible activity that he has kept going throughout 2025 to break that record. We don't know what will happen. Maybe he will come back by the summer and he'll win back the belt versus Peter Yan. if he wants an immediate rematch or if he wants to take a fight between that, we'll see. But still, we can't really say that much about this yet. If we know, if I still think that Merab has a lot more to give, even though he's at the age that he is, and I have a feeling that we might see him in the conversations at least for these awards in the next years to come as well. But we'll see that.
100%. So I think we covered every single award there that we have. Do we just want to make a quick recap, everything in order here, just to get some
Yeah.
clarity on who actually won each one? For comeback of the year, we of course had Alex Pereira. For break a star of the year, we had Joshua Van. For upset of the year, we had Elliot defeating Kaya Skora. For event of the year, we had UFC 317 International Fight Week Topuria versus Oliveira. Fight of the year, Van versus Royval on that same card, 317. Knockout of the year, Ilya Topuria versus Oliveira again, 317.
Also on 17. Yeah.
Exactly. And fight of the year,
Everyone team.
of course, Merab, the machine, I'm gonna call him because I don't want to do a Shelson and then try and pronounce his last name here.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Butchered the Jordan last name.
Exactly.
So no, but we are done here, I think, with our UFC 2025 awards. And yeah, just thank you all for listening. And I think you have enjoyed this, not only our latest videos or UFC 2025 reviews, you can watch that too, where we reviewed every individual event of the year, the numbered events, and basically talked about what we remembered and what was worth remembering about the year. And now wanted to this is you can basically think about this maybe as a as a shorter version maybe,
Yeah.
right?
With the
And
highlights. Yeah, right.
yeah, with a bit more of the highlights basically. And you can watch this and you can watch those videos as well, if you want to, and to remember some more about this last year in the UFC. So that's all for us, and thank you guys for watching.
Thank you guys for listening. Just quickly as well. We've looked back at 2025 and what a year it was, but of course, we're soon gonna put out a lot of content for 2026, our official predictions, and then in a few weeks, finally, the UFC is back. So stay tuned for that. There will be a lot of content coming soon. But like you said, that's all from us. Thank you guys a lot for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Yep, catch you on our next preview for the UFC 324 event. That's all for us. Bye.